Good to have you with me, folks, for lesson 12b. We're going to finish up unit 12 dealing with the decline in East Asia by really looking actually at a success story and more of a rise occurring away from China, and that is the nation of Japan. If you recall from last time, we talked about the Japanese. They were kind of a satellite of China, have always been in kind of the influence of China, the sphere of influence. But now we see Japan kind of breaking out, making some decisions that allow it to move forward where China is kind of slipping backwards and really develop into one of the modern powers in the beginning of the 1900s. The reading for this chapter, or for this lesson, is going to be chapter 22, pages 697 to 704. That's section 3 of that chapter, and that'll finish up chapter 22. You're looking at the rise of modern Japan. Just a couple of things to preview really quickly, and that is we're going to talk about kind of the end of isolation of Japan, take a look at the imperial Japan, and finally the rise of modern Japan, and how that led into an ultimate conflict with the United States in World War II. Some key terms that we're going to look at. There's only two for this one, just a couple to keep an eye on. One is prefecture, and another one is concession. So be looking for those. You can guarantee you'll see those on your assignment. So as China is starting to decline in the Qing Empire, we're seeing kind of an end of Japanese isolation. The same forces that are pushing Western nations to try to trade with China are also happening in Japan. Japan has a number of markets that have been untouched. So the European nations and the United States also see this as an opportunity for them to make a lot of money. They want to make sure that they have some sort of an open trade policy. So that's really what the Western nations attempt to do. Whereas in China that was done with kind of this open door policy, in Japan the United States tries to really exert its influence and sends a naval force under the Commodore Perry, who's pictured here on this page, to kind of open relations. So this is a desire. It's not a warfare situation, but certainly it's a show of force. And even though there's negotiation that goes on with the Japanese people, the United States wants to make sure it sends its best warships to show who has the power in this situation. However, diplomacy doesn't work very well. The Japanese don't have an interest at first to try to open their doors, and so then America relates to or uses threats to gain access to Japanese markets. The Japanese realize that they are outclassed and outgunned by the U.S. Navy, and so they open things up. And then other Western nations do the same to try to also get some influence in the Japanese markets. So this is very unpopular. There's a desire to kind of hold and keep traditional Japanese values, and so the opening of the Japanese society is not something that most Japanese are interested in. And the Meiji rulers step into attempt to kind of unite and modernize Japan under this new political vacuum. So when we now have kind of a power vacuum going on, they step in and try to modernize Japan. The rulers transform the politics of Japan to limit the power of the local leaders. So whereas the individual area leaders were in control before, now we want to try to have something on kind of the emperor role, where there's more power at the top end of the social structure. And we want to see a new social structure, or at least the Japanese do, that can compete with Western nations. So they see this as an opportunity to really connect with and compete with the Western society, as opposed to trying to go away from or go back to traditional roots like we see happening in China. So what's going on in Japan at this time frame? Well, remember, Japan is kind of a closed society. They haven't had a lot of influences with the West, and so it's definitely something that's a little different. The focus of Japanese society is certainly the community, family and community, and there's a strong social hierarchy. So there's people understand where your role is in Japanese society, and we talked about those roles in an earlier lesson. The Meiji rulers disband a lot of those traditional practices in an effort to try to move Japan into more of a modern Western framework. Part of that is to bring in Western art and fashion and have that become popular in Japan, really westernizing Japan. Japan also looks for, as this an opportunity to expand. China is starting to weaken. They're looking internally, and this is a great opportunity for Japan to show flex its muscles and develop some new areas to expand into. And so really it looks at Korea and parts of China as areas that it can exert its influence. Also, in 1905, the Japanese win a war with Russia. Russia is considered to be a Western nation and is incredibly embarrassed by the fact that they lose to this upstart nation from Asia, the Japanese, but it shows the power of the Japanese people and also their desire to expand. And at the same time, we're seeing some weakening in the relationships with the U.S. The U.S. is concerned that its sphere of influence in Asia is starting to be taken over by the Japanese, and we now have two powerful nations on either end of the Pacific Ocean. They're going to start to really have not only economic battles, but eventually, as we start World War II, we're going to see some military battles as well. None of this can happen, this opening of a culture, without seeing some pretty severe change. And Western influence is huge in Japan. As the Western nations trade and connect and people come in from Western nations, the Japanese really are looking to that as a way to kind of modernize. So even things like art, books and literature, and pastimes, games like baseball become incredibly popular in Japan. Baseball is brought to Japan from the United States at this point in the early 1900s. And the Japanese have never looked back. It's a huge, huge pastime in Japan, just like it is here in the United States. However, we do see some push by traditional Japanese to return to those original cultural roots. And that's going to play a part as we look at Japan as we near World War II. So, just to kind of finish off this chapter, we see some changes with China as they are declining in power, but Japan is stepping in to kind of pick up the slack and raising themselves as a real industrialized power in Asia. So we'll see how all that plays out in the future. But for now, go ahead and take a look at assignment 12b, and we'll go from there.